But we are starting with the resignation of Congressman John Conyers this week amid allegations of sexual harassment. He made his announcement on the radio, said his legacy of fighting for civil rights and representing the people of Michigan for 53 years will not be tarnished by the accusations. And he said his son should run for his seat. We'll start right there. Let's bring in our MiWeek contributors. Nolan Finley of the Detroit News, Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Gentlemen, it's always good to see you, and what a week it has been. I listened to the announcement on the radio, and it was kind of like burying the lead a little bit before Congressman Conyers got to the point where he actually endorsed his son first before he said he was retiring. And it also struck me looking at both of the newspapers this week and how you kind of cover a retirement like that or a resignation like that, and how different the coverage would have been should he have retired in a different way. Nolan, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, had he gone out in 2014, for example, when there was a tremendous amount of pressure on him not to run again because of his diminishing health and his diminishing mental faculties. And there were a lot of people in Democratic circles, the unions and what have you, begging him not to run. He told them then, support me one more time and I won't run again. And then he turned around and did it in 2016. You could imagine if he would have retired at the end of that 2014 term, he would have gone out as a hero.
Will his legacy be diminished in any way? He says no, because again, of all the work that he had done beforehand, how do you balance that, Stephen,
I think the work stands on its own. I mean, this is somebody who for 50-some years has been a voice for equality and justice and all of these things that that on the left side of the political ledger we hold pretty in high esteem. That doesn't mean that the circumstances that led him to leave office don't matter. They do matter, and it's a tragic end to what otherwise would have been a completely heroic story. But I don't think one diminishes the other in any way.
When we're looking at now the lineup of people who are eyeing his seat right now, and especially looking at two family members, State Senator Ian Conyers, who's his grandnephew, and then his son, John Conyers III. Nolan, how do you even engage what kind of family dynamic we're looking at there?
Well, neither are qualified, neither have any business running for the Senate or the House, except for their last name is Conyers. Now, we'll have to see how well that name holds up in an election. Detroiters have now been burned twice by people with last name in the last name of Conyers. Whether there's an appetite for a third one, particularly now we learn his son has been involved in domestic abuse and a domestic abuse issue, other issues. He was photographed earlier on sitting in a government vehicle, Escalade, with a bottle of champagne when he was 20 years old. There's a lot in this kid's closet already at a very young age. I don't know Ian Conyers that well. He seems like his resume is fairly thin compared to a lot of the other people who are going to be in this race. And I think this race is going to draw some big names. I think it's going to be very attractive to a lot to
I would say Ian Conyers. So Ian Conyers, I would go back though to talk a little bit about Ian Conyers, who has not had a lot of time to establish a record because he's young and new to politics. But I've actually talked to him a number of times, gotten to know him. He's a really impressive young public servant.
And this is
somebody who could be a U.S. congressman. I don't know if now is the time or later, but I certainly wouldn't disqualify him offhand. I think he should earn it on his own and not on the name. I do think this idea of a Conyers succeeding a Conyers in Congress may not sit not just with a lot of Detroiters, but with the other folks who are represented by this district.
Yeah, I mean, it's
southwest suburbs, the western suburbs.
It's a 35% suburban district.
Yeah, I don't know that they will go along, and so that opens up the opportunity for somebody else to come along and sort of run up the middle.
It also brings up the larger conversation of what's in a name, and looking at local politics and how names have gotten people very far. And even you see the retirement, we haven't talked yet about Sandy Levin and the fact that his son Andy is now going to be running for his seat. We have the Dingle dynasty as well. You have the Kildys up in the Flint area, and the Bushes, the Clintons. I mean, so the Kennedys. What is in a name still these days?
Well, it depends on the person who's carrying the name. You don't know that the second generation is going to be what the first generation, or the third generation is going to be what the previous generation. You just don't know. If you're judging a candidate mostly on the name, be prepared to get what you get. I mean, in the case of Sandy Levin, his kid's name Andy Levin. If the kid's name was his son, he's 50-year-old, but if the son's name was Andy Levine, would he measure up as a viable candidate for this seat? I would say no. He hasn't been around here that much. He's got a thin resume when it comes to public service. There's a lot of other people who are going to be in that race with bigger resumes. So, it depends on whether people get confused when they go to the bar.
So do you think people are tired of the
oh,
name?
No, are you kidding?
I was just going to
say. I mean, it's one of the things that plays really well in Detroit politics and Michigan politics to some extent is if you're the offspring of somebody who's in office, you have exponential
the
more
office
chance
becomes
of
a family
becoming
asset.
office itself. Now, the other dimension of this I think is really interesting. So you'll have the Conyers seat that's open. You'll have the Levin seat that's open. You'll have the Upton seat that's open. Is that right?
Upton's running.
He's running. Okay. Was there someone else who announced?
I think those are the only two.
Those are the only two.
But those will be, since they're both in southeastern Michigan, both in Metro Detroit, those will be very interesting races. Yeah. I think they'll draw a lot of attention. We've already seen...
And 4 elections in the Conyers seat because of this. We have to have a primary and a general for the special, and then the regular one.
That's probably coming up really fast. Yeah. And so this is going to be a sprint for these candidates because whoever wins that first round is very likely going to win the second.
It also reminds me that Dave Trott is not running also again for his seat. Yeah. But so what does that mean in terms?
So that is 3.
So what does that mean in terms of clout, congressional clout for the state of Michigan and losing a lot of these?
Yeah. So there are 3.
Dave Trott's only been around 2 terms.
Yeah, he was still low in seniority,
tired of,
but he was in the majority party.
Yeah.
Both Levin and Conyers were in the minority party. I think both were ranking members of their committees. That carries some clout, but not like when you're in the majority. When you see a lot of folks drop out when their parties are in the minority because it's just not as much fun. You don't have the same sort of power. So in that sense, and they were both older and not sort of the dynamic personalities they once were. So I think in that sense, we don't lose a whole lot of clout this round. Last round, we lost a great deal.
I also always
3 chairmen.
I always wonder about people who so enthusiastically run for these seats in the current climate. I mean, the House has changed so dramatically so that if you are in the minority party, you really have no power. I mean, the majority really locks the minority out in a way that they didn't in the past. These jobs, you have to run for them every 2 years, which means as soon as you're elected, you have to start raising money. Yeah. People, the constituents are more ornery universally than they historically have been. You wonder once you get these seats how satisfied people are. And I think that's something that factored into Dave Trott's decision to leave. I think who's the new guy near in Candace Miller's seat.
Paul
Mitchell, right. You wonder how is he finding the work in Washington? Is it as much as you thought it would be?
And it'll be interesting to see, again, what happens in 18, though, in terms of
18 is going to be an amazing